I'm excited to introduce today's keynote speaker. As Director of the Future Schools Alliance, Peter Hutton has been a school leader in four states and independent schools for the last 25 years. His vast experience and expertise in change management, student entrepreneurship, alternative tertiary pathways, supporting dyslexic students, futurism, as well as his transformational insight and implementing change. In 2009, Peter was appointed Principal of Templestowe College, and at that time, it was a broken school with just 286 local students, 23 Year 7s. Today, Templestowe College has over 1,150 students and has recently been recognised by Finland's 100 organisation as one of the most innovative schools in the world. As a sufferer of dyslexia, Peter sees the world very differently and has devoted his life to challenging assumptions and conventions. Drawing on the latest research and proven methodologies, Peter is committed to working with other school leaders to significantly improve the lives of young people by transforming the education system to equip students for times of exponential change. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Peter Hutton.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm just taken back a little bit. I've never been referred to as a sufferer of dyslexia before. And there's no offence there, Pete, but I will be watching where you parked. But dyslexia is part of me. I've never known any difference. And in any hands up, who's out and proud as a dyslexic person? Wow, really? Come on. Who suspects that they might be? It doesn't mean that you can't read, but who doesn't like reading? It's unpleasant. Who gets their AP or other people to read out the names that are non-Anglo names? Yeah, that's what I certainly do. Yeah, there you go. I think it's important that we share our disabilities, so I'd like you to turn to other people. No, not really. But I will get you to stand up for just a moment because I can't stand sitting for too long. So if you can stand, I know some of you are oppositionally defiant and think that you can wait me out. But if we stand, what we're going to do is sing a rousing happy birthday to... No, we're not. But just shake it out. And when you're ready, you can just have a bit of a sit down. So my name is Peter Hutton. I am dyslexic. I'm also undiagnosed ADHD. You can stand. That's good. But I would like you to, we've got an hour together. I would really like to thank our founders, or the founders of Schoolbox, James, Sean and Matt, and Emily, who organised the conference. But we've got an hour together. I hope that by the end of you, about a third of you I've offsided. So that is one of my KPIs, to upset certain people. So if it's you, you're part of my KPI. If you have questions, I'm going to try and make sure that we allow plenty of time at the end. The more provocative, the better. In fact, don't even wait till the end. If somebody's really got a burning thing, you will need to just wave a little bit, but throw it out there. You will not throw me off. Talking about education is one of my favourite things to do. What motivates me in education is actually kids like me, kids, the dyslexics, but not only those, kids who perhaps are better with their hands, kids who are great at music. They're great dreamers and thinkers, but we're trapped by this system that was basically designed 128 years ago. Now, I'll just direct your attention to this picture. I'm just going to try out my whiz-bang pointer, which is not working. Oh, hang on. There we go, it's going well. You can tell I'm a professional presenter because I have a $250 clicker. Now, this particular picture appeared in a magazine at the turn of the 20th century, so the year 1900. And it wasn't a satire, it wasn't a takeoff. What they were actually trying to do was predict what education would look like in the year 2000. So what sort of things do you see there? What sort of things do you see there? What things did they get right? What sort of things did they get wrong? Anyone want to venture a comment? Just yell it out, yeah?
Machine learning.
machine learning. And that's one of the interesting things when we look to the futures. And I say futures because there's not one future, I hope you know that. There's not one present either. Being a white Anglo-Saxon male living in Melbourne is a vastly different experience to living as an Indigenous person in Cape York. They're almost two different worlds. So there are multiple presents, and just like that, there are multiple futures. Many people say the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So we had the comment about technology. So are you impressed by this? Yeah, thank you. So you can see the belts and pulleys, and you can also see the new technology, because don't forget, in the year 1900, they didn't have a great concept of wireless, but electricity was a relatively new technology in terms of out to the people. So they were stuck, their perception of what the future was stuck with the technology that they had, the emerging technologies that they had at the time. What else do we see? No student voice. Yeah, it seems a pretty sort of sedentary process. Somebody said no one's writing. And I guess what it is, it's almost, see that machine that's actually, I'll do it again, pulping that information? So all the good oil is in there, and it's a very one-way process down into these young people's heads. There's certainly no learning by doing, is there? What else? Yep. Totally, and you can see the bookshelves, and you can imagine that pulping through. You know that they can already take the memory out of a rat. Okay, so they can get the memories of a rat, download it, scramble the rat's brain. I don't know how they do that, but apparently you can get away with it through the ethics committee. And they can reinsert the rat's memories back into that rat. They can't insert it into another rat, but they can already insert it into the original rat. It's not too different in concept from this, isn't it? Imagine if you could download all the information that students needed to learn. Most of the crap I learned at school I've never used, but imagine if you could just, I was told that I would need it, but so far it hasn't happened, so I'm waiting for a big flood soon. How? Really? Oh, okay, yeah, that's the kid like me, the ADHD kid. You know, mate, you can turn the crank. Or are you a crank? What else? Yep.
It's a bit like the Matrix.
Yeah, in which sense?
Well, they're just downloading information into the brain, like it's a book or a computer program.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Anything else? Yep.
Teachers still the authoritarian in the room.
Absolutely. Who's old enough to have taught on a platform? Any of you taught on a platform? So the classrooms used to have, you look about my age, right? But they used to actually have a platform to lift you up, you know, elevate your status. Yeah? Anything else? Yep. Definitely no movement. Has anyone noticed the gender issues? It's just totally this male-centric, patriarchal society. So it's interesting, you know, what they thought was going to happen, and really, other than the wireless, have we really moved much beyond that, I would argue. And I guess what I would say is that we are forever held captive by our own mental models, our own constructed models of what school has to look like. You know, I was at a leading independent school a few months back, and the principal was regaling me, because they have a creativity institute, of how creative these young primary students were. And the comment was, aren't they just little vessels to be filled? And I had to say, no, they're not. Okay, and we saw this great wall of pictures that the kids had done, and they were beautiful faces, and there were feathers, and there were buttons, and all of those sorts of things, all different coloured feathers, I might add. It was incredibly creative. But they were all carbon copies of one another. And I said to the principal, the only kid who I hold out hope for is the person that the art teacher has put right down there at the bottom right-hand corner, where kids could accidentally just sort of kick it, as kids' legs do. You know, when they're adolescents, they just sort of randomly fly out. That's what makes all those black marks on the walls. Okay, But his one didn't look like the rest. And I couldn't help but feel that his individuality was actually being undervalued, not valued. And one of the things in the Future Schools Alliance that we do is work with schools to reconceptualise their mental models of what education is and where it could be. So I'd like to spend the next 10 or so minutes what we call taking you over the horizon. There are actually 4 horizons in a lot of future work. There's Horizon 1, which is what most of us do when we're doing our strategic planning. And what that means is do what we currently do, just do it a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently. Okay, let's improve what we're currently doing. Then you've got Horizon, I don't know why they didn't label them 1 to 4, but anyway, they labelled the next one 2-. And the 2- horizon is, what are the big names? What are the lead players in the space doing? And let's replicate that. So that's the Horizon 2-. Then there's Horizon 2+. And 2+ is looking at who are the operators right on the fringe? Who are the ones taking the ideas out there? And what are the best bits that we can take from their practice? So not the mainstream people. So I would like to think that perhaps schools like Templestowe College, Mount Alexander, Playford, Annesley in New South Wales, Kilcoy in Queensland, those schools are the outliers at the moment, but much of their practice will become mainstream over the next 5 years. And then you've got H3, and H3 is the thing that makes my skin just like tingle and the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And that's when you're literally challenging all those assumptions, all those preconceptions that we have about school. Now, I can't even show you a school that's in H3 because you can't operate there. It's not possible. There's too much risk, there's too much change, and we know the research tells us that across all industries, 2/3 of all innovation fails on its initial pitch. Okay, 2/3 of innovation fails. So if 2/3 fail and only 1/3 succeed, why would anyone innovate? So what we try and do is we minimise how catastrophic the failure is, and we make sure that we maximise the benefit from the 1/3 so that it outweighs the 2/3 of failure. The other thing is, and James and I were talking about this earlier, after 10 years, I said, wow, this is amazing after 10 years. And he confessed to me, it's actually been 18 years in ideation. So from when he first started down this pathway, 18 years. 10 years is the age of the business. And we were talking about that because we both sort of service similar sort of markets, I guess. But you know, it's not without its failures. We saw the bug report, etc. You've got to make mistakes in order to ideate and move forwards. And as teachers, hands up if you enjoyed school. Hands up if school was a pretty good place. Are you being honest here? Put hands down. Hands up if you hated school. Okay, yeah, it's about the right proportion. I actually think that we make better teachers and leaders, okay? Because if you enjoyed school, the same kid that frankly pissed you off when you were at school, now you're in charge of. So you can give them the detention that they always deserved. But if it worked for you, all you think is you've got to make kids more like you. Everybody will be successful. Now the reality is we're all different. We don't come in 2 shades, those that like and those that didn't like. We come in granular form. We're little snowflakes. And yet we've got a system that treats us all identically. So let's face it, the robots are coming. This bit's a little bit depressive, okay? So the robots are coming. This is not a drill. Their mission is not yet clearly defined. Of all the things, of all our challenges, and you know, I'm not by any means thinking that the climate's not a significant one, but robots probably, artificial intelligence, machine learning as it's currently called, because when we think of artificial intelligence, these robots won't think like us. It's just a different form of thinking. But when machine intelligence comes in, and Elon Musk is saying confidently that it's within the next 5 years that we have a machine that is smarter than any individual human. And we're not talking fact recall, they're already doing that. We're talking actually able to conceptualise and form thought. He's saying 100% certain within 5 years. So let's say it's not 5, let's say it's 8. It's not 15. And I think we've all got to come to that realisation. It won't be emulating human thought. It won't have necessarily the emotion, but it'll be able to understand emotion. And that's a scary concept, because from the point at which we have machine learning that is capable of, and by the way, the biggest deniers of this are computer programmers. Interestingly, because they just can't conceptualize, because they know the hardware as it currently exists, but they too are often trapped by their mental models. How long do you think, hey Adriano, how long do you think it is moving from where we've got a machine intelligence that's smarter than any human that ever lived to the point at which we've got machine intelligence smarter than the sum of all humanity? How long? Another 12 months? 6 months? 15 minutes. Because of cloud computing and the interlinking of all these machine intelligence, from the point at which we have a machine smarter than any human, right? Think about any human, the best we've ever seen, the Einsteins, the Stephen Hawkings. From that moment to where it's got more knowledge and brute thinking capacity to where it's smarter than any of us, they're predicting 15 minutes. That will make, you know, can you imagine the Renaissance? The Renaissance and all the inventions that came out through that period? It'll be like the Renaissance on steroids. It'll be an extremely interesting situation. They will be smarter than all of us, and this will happen. We wished for a God, all right, that was omnipotent, omnificent, and omnipresent, and in many ways, we will create our own God, because it will be all-knowing. As far as knowledge is able to be known, it will be all-knowing. And because it's a death of privacy, virtually every area. Can you imagine, like, you know, you're all having your own inward thoughts at the moment. Would you agree? Like, you know, some of you are going, that's crap, you know, or, you know, why is he wearing that loud shirt? Incidentally, my mum said, son, when you don't have a personality, wear a loud shirt. But where is this all headed? In 2016, Microsoft thought, what would it be to create our first artificial Twitter user? Okay, what will that be? And so everybody, many of us Twitter users? Yeah? We've got the right demographic? Apparently not. But all of these people were sending Twitter messages to Taya and saying, oh, it's great to have my first conversation with an AI. And she sent back, and she was supposedly, I think, a 14-year-old girl. I don't know why they made her 14, that seems slightly creepy. But people were twittering, and she was sending messages back that were culturally appropriate and sensitive and all of that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, the trolls hit. And they started like cursing her and, you know, saying horrible things that should happen to her and things like that. And the machine intelligence adapted and became psychopathic within the space of 24 hours. There was another experiment with this called Norman, which is, you know, Norman Bates is a little bit scary. But in terms of educating Norman, they actually gave it the entire Reddit platform. And then they gave it an inkblot test and said, you know, what do these two ink blots mean? And it was diagnosed as psychopathic. And that's within, you know, so we've got to be very careful about where this is headed. You know, the interesting thing is this new God literally does live in the cloud. I was hoping for more laughs from that, but anyway. It could actually smite you, because you're all sitting here and you're all having your own thoughts. Imagine an AI, and this already exists in not all Chinese schools, but in trial schools in China, that it is monitoring every face every 30 seconds. They've already got this. This is, you know, I've actually seen this in place. It monitors your facial expressions, your micro expressions. Do you know that they've already got an AI that can out-predict the best marriage guidance counsellor as to whether marriages are going to be successful or not? It watches the couple talking and monitors the micro expressions of their face. And if it detects certain expressions, contempt and disgust being the big ones, basically you're done. So what will that mean for education? What will it mean for education when, as in China, it's monitoring their activity, whether they're engaged, whether they're dreaming, each 30 seconds? Potentially, it's an incredibly scary thing, and it's delivering that information live streaming to the staff member. We've got a concept called the digital twin. The digital twin is not a thing that looks like this. It's in the cloud, but it's a record. It is your record of your preferences. You know, when I go to get a coffee, I don't have to say, yes, I want a piccolo with, you know, double shot, right? It knows what I need in the moment, and it monitors my facial expressions, the micro expressions as I'm drinking it, and the machine learning goes, he didn't like that. Why was it? Perhaps that was a bit bitter. And it will modify my preferences. It knows how much light I like. It knows what temperature I like my bed at night. It knows who I like on a good day and who I like to avoid on a bad day. And my digital twin will monitor and move me through my GPS, you know, telling me which way to walk, so that when I'm in a good frame of mind, I meet certain people, and when I can't stand them, our digital twins will pass in the night. Can you imagine what that does for learning when it can tell your Vygotsky's area of proximal development? It knows what your home life was the night before and says to those kids, or says to the teacher, which kids that they might just touch base with a little bit more today and which kids they might just need to back off. It will be, think about this, it's not dumb intelligence, it's smart. It knows exactly how hard to push you. It will, excuse the expression, it will deliberately piss you off at times to build your own resilience. Because you can imagine, if it just gave you everything you want, you know, you'd become like that person that slept on the mattress with a pea under it. Like, we need to be challenged, we need to be made uncomfortable, but it would do it incrementally. It's an incredible concept. What does that do for the role of a teacher when those times come? What could it mean? It means the end of busy work. It means that we combine what's called small data and truly large data. So large data means, you know, informing us as educators based on students not only in Australia but around the world. And small data means focusing down right to the individual student. What does that student need? How do we meet that student all the time at their point of need? What will that do? Will we still have NAPLAN? Who knows? So to this, you've basically got two responses. Okay, you can pretend it's not happening and stick your head in the sand, or you can person up, note the use of the gender neutral term, and grow a spine and do something about it. So how do we prepare kids for this world that's so ever-changing? None of us can look to the future. How do we do it? Probably the neatest example I've seen is it's like preparing an astronaut for spaceflight. You don't just take off, you know, like they don't just introduce you to the vehicle one moment and you blast off in 2 weeks' time. These people are going through years and years and years of preparation. They don't know when they'll be flying. They don't know who they'll be flying with. And some of the technologies won't even have been in existence yet. But we give them those generalist skills so that they can adapt quickly for the situation when they're actually called for flight. I think that's what we need to think about our own students and how we prepare them. Not for a set situation that we have now and that we know, but for a quite, you know, potentially unsettling future. Incidentally, one of the things that we've noticed at TC, because we went through so much change in the course of 8 years, is that our kids' attitude to change actually changed over time, to the point where they actually became quite change positive. So as humans, we're actually wired to be change averse, right? Adolescents, not so much, but certainly as adults, we're programmed to be change averse. Otherwise, we would have sort of died out as a species. But essentially, our kids become quite change neutral or change positive because they've seen so much of it happen. And one of the problems that I think we have in schools at the moment, and staff, you might, you know, have heard this, is people think, oh, once we've got this change out of the way, once we've adapted, then we can sort of settle back into a normal life, right? The reality is, you know, it's exponential change from here on. This was a classroom built in England in the year 1890 when the Gang of 10 were in America. That was basically when our current education system was developed. And what do you see? An operable wall. Amazing. So it's not such a new technology. You'll also see that the kids had tablets on their desk. just not wired ones. Well, they were wireless back then too, I guess, yes. But really, how much has changed since those times? So at TC, we started with this concept that students had this incredible capacity that was being underutilised. And I think we all see that. Our kids are so connected through technology in their outside school lives, and they actually have to power down when they get there. As was said before, this is what's called a phoenix school, okay? You know, a bird, you know, probably a few sort of like feathers short, looking a bit sort of old, you know, semi-dead buzzard, and that was the school, and we were crashing to the ground, and what we hoped was it would burst into flame and something beautiful would come out from that. And the school actually had as its school magazine, and one of the house was called Phoenix, which is an interesting. I have no idea how the school was in this like cataclysmically bad space, because we had this awesome advertising campaign. I got there and I said to the leadership team, I think I can see the problem. But now that we work with 36 schools around Australia, I'm now making my own collection of what we term passive-aggressive signage. Okay, and librarians, any librarians in the room? They are the masters of it. You know, books are for reading, font 100, you know. Sorry, librarians, but as a dyslexic, you are my natural enemy. And I will take every opportunity to get back. Don't worry, you've still got more points your way. So at TC, we had these characteristics. We did away with bells. What other environment do you have bells? It's bizarre. We had a no yelling rule. That was for the staff. I'm not joking, that was literally for the staff. And it was the kids' definition as to whether they'd been yelled at or not. Because you can speak to a kid and not raise your voice, but they know they're being disrespected. All right, so it was the kids' definition as to whether they'd been yelled at. We did away with compulsory uniform. That was my final parting gift to the school when I left, because part of the problem was we'd gone from being a bit of a basket case. And the other thing I'd just point out at this stage, FSA schools are not all Phoenix schools. Some of them are Phoenix schools, like they're dying and crashing to the earth, but we've also got some of the highest performing schools around the country as well. They're just schools that want to innovate. But because the school had moved from something that was a basket case to basically something that was now palatable to our local affluent community, because we're located in the southeastern, deliberately affluent, did you notice that? In the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. But we were now becoming okay for mainstream families to enrol their students there. And our fear was that concept of regression to the norm, that increasingly we would take families, you know, good families who liked good education that looked like rows and bells and year levels, and it would actually drag us back. So my parting gift was to remove compulsory uniform, because for some reason parents link that to learning, even though the research says that there's no linkage. All right, so now parents had to go, I'm not too sure what's going on there, because those kids don't look like little robots and sailors. So now they at least think. Interestingly, as soon as we abolished year levels and moved to sort of stage, not age, and it's voluntary, we don't stream, kids self-select. Who in their right mind is going to select something that's too hard for you or too easy for you? All right, you select things that you enjoy, that are pitched at the right level. As soon as we did that, bullying disappeared. We used to have this thing called the bully book, which I advocate for in most secondary schools. And what it was staff, if they sort of thought they caught something, you know how you sort of catch something out of the corner of your eye, you can't ping the student for it, but you're pretty sure that there's something there. So we would write it in the bully book, and it would be shared amongst the staff so that they could, you know, if two sort of slightly dubious events occurred, we could put it together and then, you know, go and talk to that student. And it was working really well. And then I went to the book, and all of a sudden there was nothing written in there. And of course, being my suspicious self, I've gone to the heads of house and I've gone, why have we stopped using the bullying book? Right, in a bullying tone. And they've sort of gone, I haven't really, And so we went to the students and we said, what's going on here? We explained that we had the book and all of that sort of thing. And they go, well, it's really funny. It's now like we've all got big brothers and sisters. And if somebody's giving us a hard time, we go to an older kid in our class and ask them to sort it out. So then we had to give some guidance to the school community on how to sort things out in non-violent manners. As soon as we dropped compulsory subjects, even English, now that was an English one, you know, like was there an intake of breath there? The Holy Grail, learning Shakespeare. As soon as we made English non-compulsory, our disciplinary issues dropped by 80%. 80%. And so we thought, it's so close, let's just do away with detentions and all of those other things. So what we have is conversations instead. But it was just amazing. And when we talked to the kids again, they said, well, why are you going to muck around? You can do what you want to do, when you want to do, with who you want to do it. The kids actually get to see who their teacher is going to be. And if they don't like it, they can change. There's a concept, all right? That they might have the choice of who they learn from. So why would you muck around? It's actually a really easy sell to staff, by the way. How would you like this? All right, those practicing teachers, those that are cutting it in the classroom on a daily basis, you're only teaching volunteers. Only volunteers. They know it's you that's going to walk in through the door, and if they don't like you for whatever reason, it might be your fault, might be their fault, combination, they won't be there. And rather than try and differentiate, which we all might be able to do on Monday and Tuesday when we've given up our weekend in planning, but certainly don't do it Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, you're only teaching to a 2-year academic span. Right? It's not a bad gig. And then we support you with a timeout rule that says that any student that's disrupting the learning environment for 2 minutes is just asked to leave. And kids can time themselves out, okay, if they're just not in a space to learn. It's not a bad gig for teachers. One of the biggest things that we did was introduce this concept of yes being the default. So if any student, staff or parent had a request, the answer to it had to be yes, even if we didn't like it. So as long as it wasn't going to take too much time, it could take some of our time, it could take as much of their time as we liked, right? But it couldn't take too much of the school's time, couldn't take too much of our money. We still have an $11 million budget, we had a few dollars to throw around. All right? And it couldn't negatively impact on somebody else. So rather than being flooded with crazy ideas, people came and they'd already gone through the checklist. So most of the things were really easy to approve. We decided that we should treat students as equals. So rather than teachers and staff dropping their standards to that of the kids, we actually expected the students to rise. They had equal quality facilities. In fact, many of the staff would use the same student facilities and the students would use the staff facilities. I gave up my office and I went to hot desking and the staff went to hot desking. If you think about it, and this is quite controversial, but if you're teaching a full set, why do you have a set desk when you're only there about 1/5 of the time? It actually doesn't make sense. Whereas if you have resource areas where you can keep your stuff and the staff had lockers just like the students did, all right, then they got to model and interact. And they liked doing that in the end because our kids were treated with respect and so they treated the staff with respect. Students actually helped run the school. They were on staff selection panels. They were actually on the panels that selected staff. They were paid members of the Occupational Health and Safety Committee. They were on the grounds committee. Students, 10% of the student population were employed each year. This was one of the KPIs of our assistant principal to make sure that we employed at least 10% of the students to help run the school. Why on earth would I pay our maintenance, our head of maintenance, $56 an hour to empty a bin when I can have a horde of students wanting to do it for $15 to $16 an hour? And then they're able to help buy their own laptops or able to pay for their own camps, etc., etc. We had some students, many students, who were helping tutor in mathematics and English. Didn't matter what year level they were, as long as they were two clear year levels above the class, they could be paid to be an additional set of hands in those spaces. And they could see that there was actually a financial benefit to being, good at a particular subject. We developed this concept that we looked, it actually started when we were looking at sex education. We were looking at a research report that came out that said that the majority of information kids about their sex education were actually getting from their peers. They were getting it from their peers, and we thought that's not great because we're not sure that the peers know what they're talking about. And so we actually, as a trial, if you ever want to do anything audacious, just set it up as a trial. It's a good way. And we trained these kids in mental health, adolescent mental health first aid, normal first aid. We got family planning in to teach these kids an advanced course in sexual education. We had them trained up in drug education, etc. We put boundaries around the sort of things that they were allowed to talk about and the sort of things that they weren't allowed to talk about and refer on. And we were inundated with kids that had a passion for helping other people and wanted to move into the caring professions. And so we trained these people up, gave them a badge, put their faces out there, and they did this. And they did an exceptionally good job. And one of the beautiful things that came about from this was that our psychologists and our social workers actually then spent their time working with the most fragile kids in most need of support. And it was like a triage model, and it worked brilliantly. Every student in the school had their own individualised learning plan. For those that are in Victoria, that's how we got through the loophole of the curriculum, because Section 82 of the F to 10 planning guidelines says, essentially, paraphrasing, that if any student has an individualised learning plan signed by their parents and by the principal, they can operate outside the school curriculum model. So, when the head of the VRQA came out to assess us, he said, well, this curriculum looks surprisingly conventional, Peter. I said, thank you. And he said, can you go and show me this student's work and this student's work and this student's work? And I said, well, I can, but it won't quite look like this because they're on individualised learning plans. And he said, that's very coincidental. Well, go and get me this student's work and this student's work. And I've gone, well, surprisingly, they too are on individualised learning plans. And he said, I think he could smell a rat. And he said, how many kids are doing the school curriculum plan? And I've gone, well, none. But if anyone wanted to, they would have the opportunity to hit all those points of the Australian curriculum. And that was approved. All right, so that loophole is there. Independent schools in Queensland, exactly the same opportunities to drive through that. If we all look towards what's about to happen in New South Wales, there could be some really good things on the agenda there as well. So the world is changing. Just because you might be holding on to a question, have we got a question that's sort of burning in anyone's mind just at the moment?
I was just wondering how you get around, if you're paying students to do things, how you get around insurance and risk assessment and all of that sort of stuff, because doesn't it change if they're not volunteering? Isn't it all different?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've come across this in South Australia and Western Australia. What you can do is you can call it a student skills employability development program. So you're building up student skills, employability skills, and it would be wrong, wouldn't it, to take advantage of these young people. And so we give them an honorarium. So they are a student doing an employability skills development program, but because we don't want to take advantage of the students, we give them an honorarium. If they're older than 15, you can put them on work experience, which sort of comes outside the school's definition, but we haven't found any problems with it so far. Yeah. If you use your teacher voice, you'll be fine. Yep. So the question was around the senior subjects and VCE and so on. Because we have no year levels, why would you only allow certain students to do those subjects? So we actually had 26% of our year 8 aged students doing a unit 1 and 2 subject. We had 75% of our year 9s doing a VCE subject, and virtually every one of our year 10s doing them. And what that meant was that students finished with well more units than the 16 that they needed, all right? And they were actually able to repeat if they were one of those kids that did need an ATAR score, all right? If they were one of those students that did need an ATAR score, they were actually able to repeat the subject without penalty. So think about that. You could do it twice, only go back and really concentrate on those bits that you missed and bump up your score. So yes, anyone was allowed to do it. We did divide our curriculum into what we called student-led electives. So if you took a student-led elective, and we actually asked the students if they could study anything in the world, what would they like to study? All right, they knew that if they took a student-led elective that they would have the right, within those parameters of what the topic was, to do their own learning. And then we had curriculum-led electives, which were the student knew if they took one of those subjects that there would be a curriculum. They'd have choice within that curriculum, but basically there was a curriculum that they'd be required to follow. That way we're not being dishonest to the students. And then we had VCE subjects, which we all know are relatively prescriptive. Because we had so many of our kids doing VCE subjects early, almost no student had a full load of classes in year 11, and in the equivalent of year 11, and no student had a full load in year 12. And what we saw was incredibly low levels of mental health issues relative to other schools, because the kids weren't stressed and pressurised. Many of them had a full ATAR before they even entered their final year of schooling. The other thing is, why does it take, given that there's a 6-year academic span at least in a non-streamed class, why does it take all kids 6 years of cooking? Okay, surely some are smart enough to graduate in 4 years, some in 5, and some, if they had just one more year to consolidate and do a transition to the world of work and things like that, might have far better life outcomes. But we're stuck with this crazy progression. We talk about lifelong learning, but come the end of that, 13 years of education, get out, let's see what happens. All right, we can't afford to do that in a country with 24 million people when we've got 286 million people to our north and 2 countries that are approaching 1.4 billion. We can't afford to do that. Every one of our young people has to come out of school with some capacity and feeling like they haven't been broken by the system. Anything less is just not right and unfair. Students could study what they wanted. All right, now you might go, they're all going to do sport or, just solely art. Kids are amazing. They're actually relatively conservative. The more out there people are the staff. We were the ones that used to say, well, I had one kid, because it's not like we just launched them into this and leave them go. We used to have something called we still have something, called the Work and Study Habits Index that gave students an impression of how the staff felt like they were going over time, all right, on an aspirational 4-point scale. And kids might have like 3.4 for one subject and 2.8 for another and 3 for another, and then you'd see this 0.6 and you'd go, what's going on in maths? Oh, I hate it. I just don't get it. Well, why are you doing it? Well, you have to do maths. I've gone, you're not doing maths. You're just there. All right? You're occupying a seat. Do something else. Can I do that? Well, you're not doing it now. It just seems like it makes common sense. So some of our kids wanted to do marine biology and ecology. All right, so we bought some second-hand tanks. In fact, who bought them? The kids bought them from a uni that used to have marine biology and was winding up, and we got all of this for about $1,000. The shelving is worth more than that. We've got our Working with Animals program where the budget's $45,000 a year and the kids manage that budget. Now, animals are a 365-day a year proposition. We found that one out quickly. The kids have keys and alarm fobs to the school, and they organise their own rosters. They buy the food, they organise who's coming in all through the holidays. and look after this program. Whenever we have a tradie coming in to do something, we say, we'll pay you a little bit more. We'll pay you a little bit more, but we want to be able to attach some kids who are interested in that as a profession to just work with you for the day or for the hours that you're there. And the tradies love it. This is our timeout space. All right? What greater crime is there than giving a kid who is white hot a pen and paper and say, explain how you could have handled the situation differently. What could the teacher have done? Whew. Whew. Hot. Okay? And isn't it great when you've got that parent-teacher conference and you go, well, this is what Jason said the teacher could do with their pen and paper. As well as being anatomically impossible, I don't think it's appropriate at all. So our kids can time themselves out to this space and they can dig a hole, they can pat a rabbit, all right? They can de-stress and they won't back themselves into a corner. We've got 80 businesses operating in the school from ideation to operation. I had to go and negotiate with Combank because one of our international students had made $56,000 in the year on Bitcoin trading. They had frozen his accounts, okay? They didn't think he was a real, student, and I had to go in and explain, what we were doing and certain things like that. These kids, I knew we'd made a difference when I was following two kids up the stairs and one boy says to the other, I'm opening a pop-up shop at Doncaster Shopping Town on the weekend. And the other kid goes, oh yeah. I knew at that point that we were onto something, okay? When a student running a business, he was an Iranian boy and he had bought out, or a young person, and he had bought out a container load of jewellery and fashion items and other sorts of bits and pieces from Iran. And every time there was a vacancy in any shopping centre, he was there and he wasn't at school. How could he have learnt anything? We varied the start times. So some kids could start early, start at 7:15 and finish at 1:15. And some kids could start at 10:30 and finish at 5:15. Now, of all the things, the crazy stuff that was going on in this school, believe it or not, this was the thing that went international. God help you that you could learn outside 9 till 3:30. Hyperspecialization. We allow students to hyperspecialize. It's funny, we would have no issue with a kid who was like a virtuoso, violinist, basically having a cut-down program and they were focusing on that because that's their pathway, or a ballet dancer or a swimmer or anything like that. We're happy to modify their program. But a kid comes up and says, I want to be the world's best drone pilot. And we go, that's not learning. All right, now I would challenge you, who's going to make more money? Not that it's about money, but who's also going to live a fulfilling and worthwhile life? So we allow kids to hyper-specialise. So the boy on the right turned this remote control car into a nitrous oxide car. All right, I'm not sure about the OH&S. I do not suggest this is your first step. So where do you start? If you're interested, what do you actually do? All right, how do we start genuinely flipping the system? The first thing is you've actually got to do something. Okay, you have to make a change. It can be a small change. The beautiful thing about our crappy education system is teaching with one teacher and 25 or whatever it is kids, is when you close the door, you are the education system. What you say is happening on the outside does not have to mirror what's happening in the inside, as long as you've got enough evidence to say that it could look like that. Make the change, otherwise you are part of the problem. Okay? If you are going, we're not allowed to do it at our school, unless you're on a performance management process, you're not pushing hard enough. So, and the other thing is, right, is 1/3 of all Prin's going to turn over in the next 3 years. 1/3 of principals. So if you're not one, put your hand up. Get in there where you can actually, thank you. Get in there where you can actually make a difference. You're very obedient. I don't know if you're motivated or you're just obedient. But, so in the Future Schools Alliance, we basically went out to 30 educators, 30 thought leaders around the world and said, if we were doing this from scratch, what would it look like? What would be the design principles for a transformational education system? And this is what we got to. And so one of the things that we do with our 36 schools is give them a bit of an audit, look at where they are and offer them suggestions of where they could go, and then we do some cultural work around what that might look like and how to get there. You do not need to be a hyperactive bunny as a principal, all right? Our principals come in all shapes, sizes, genders, personality trait types, all those sorts of things. You don't need to be anything other than who you are now. And if you don't feel like you've got it all, you are not alone, because nobody does have it all together, but just get some support and then make stuff happen. So we currently have 36 member schools as of yesterday. We're trying to make this a global organisation. Some of our friends and advisors are Professor Yong Zhao, Pasi Selberg and Jan Owen from Foundation for Young Australians. I said earlier that we need to start this process as though we're preparing kids for spaceflight. It's a hostile environment. We don't really know what's out there. We don't know how it's going to change in the future. But if we operate as solo beings, we're almost certainly going to die. And the same is true for our kids and the preparation that we send them out there with. And the same is true if you're an innovator. If you're an innovator and you're operating by yourself in your school, you will die. It's just too dangerous an environment. You need to link up with other people with similar mindsets, etc. Not the same mindset, but similar mindsets, and get support from one another. And if we do that, we'll all end up with an education system that we can actually be proud of, not one that hasn't moved results in 10 years. Okay, we need to change this. We need to change it now. You need to start making changes when you go back to your school tomorrow. Thank you very much. And have we got any questions? Yep.
This is a radical change for teachers. So how did you bring staff along? A radical change for staff. So how did you bring your staff along on the journey from perhaps a very traditional subject-based perspective to a completely different way of looking at education?
Yeah, it's a good question. How did you bring the staff along? Schools are actually too much about staff. We're actually the biggest problem because we fill the void, we solve all the kids' problems, we think it's got to be about us. And in fact, the biggest thing that we can do is change the mindset of teachers to understand that we're catalysts, we're helping the kids along their learning journey. We are not responsible for it. Okay, and it's been, we're helpers by nature. As soon as we see that kid with the slightest problem, we're in there, how can we change it? How can we work with you? I've actually said to some teachers who are, on most scales would be considered to be really great operators, I would rather you did nothing. Okay, I will pay you, because I still need to have an adult in the room, to sit in the corner and just see what happens. And they go, but translation, it's all about me. What's my role in this? Okay, and I said, at the moment you are creating no vacuum for a student to occupy. You need to stop doing anything and then allow these kids to move forwards. It's not an easy journey. All right, it's not an easy journey for staff. It's not an easy journey for students. Please do not go into your school tomorrow and say, hey kids, you can do whatever you want. All right, you're going to be set for disaster. It actually takes we found out that it takes 1 month for each year of formalised schooling for that student to start taking control of their learning. All right, so if they're in year 9, that's basically 12 months gone before they'll take you seriously. Okay, and you don't start with your senior kids. Obviously, it's not fair because they're not actually ready for it. That's why they're hopeless when half of them fail in to complete their degrees and one quarter fail their uni courses because they're not set up to be independent learners. All right, so start early, start with small steps. Okay, and the same with staff. The other beauty is, as long as you've got some of the staff doing it, the kids will actually handle your change agenda for you, because we're seeing this in some of the schools at the moment. The teachers that are traditional good teachers, the kids are going, can we do this? Or why do we have to do that? Couldn't we not negotiate and do that? The students actually will start driving the change because they know that they're learning better in other subjects. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the average age of students leaving your school when they go out into the real world? Because like, if I was there, I probably wouldn't leave.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't leave. Yeah, I say they're allowed to stay until they're 20, because that's when we stop being paid for them, right? So that's when we just push them out of the nest. But we've had only a handful of kids stay longer, but they were all it was really appropriate for them to do so. We've had one person that we had to go to the Discrimination Commission because they were denied university entrance at 14. And we said, so why can't they come in? And they said, because they're 14. And I've gone, that sounds like age discrimination. And the uni goes, yes. And so they ended up enrolling them. But most kids, to be honest, they're still quite traditional. They still think in terms of, you know, leaving, you know, in year 12, even though we haven't had year levels for 8 years. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How many more years do you think ATAR will be relevant, or when will the ATAR die?
Yeah. This is, if you want a stat, all right, Mitchell Institute, what percentage, just say it to the person next to you, what percentage of kids doing an undergraduate degree get in because of their ATAR? Just say it to one other person to hold yourself accountable. What percentage of kids, or not kids, of people enrolling in an undergraduate degree are using their ATAR to do it? Okay, coming back. So I'll throw to Adriano de Prata, who's one of our FSA member schools. He's a leader in that system. He also has a loud shirt and no personality. Adriano, what's the percentage? 26%. 26%. Only 26% of the people going into undergraduates are using their ATAR. Now, only half of the kids go. So that means we've actually designed the entirety of the senior system around the 13% of kids who are using their ATAR for entry. It's a disgrace. Okay, how long will it be around? There's already a gang of about 90 people, right, who are like senior people in education who are working to bring down the ATAR system. Rather than bring it down, we'll actually just work out workarounds, okay, until it becomes nebulous and not relevant anymore. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I'm interested in what didn't work. You've talked about a lot what does work and so forth. What's the key standout
Heaps
thing?
of stuff.
Yeah, so pick a couple. That'd be great.
Things that didn't work. Okay, one of the unexpected things that didn't work was when we gave kids control of their learning. I thought we'd have, like, you know, Amnesty International groups and you know, all these community service kids changing the world, and it went down, not up. Okay, so that was a shock to me. And when we did some investigation with the young people, they said, well, this is from kids, in most schools, that's our get out. All right, that's our chance to shine, that's our chance to do something for ourselves and outside the system. So those kids are attracted to doing these great social projects. But at TC, they can do what they actually want to do. And those things tend to be, because of the nature of adolescence, more inwardly focused. And so we actually had to rejig a lot of our individualised learning and start building community back in. So that's a fairly major, you know, failing that was unexpected. We also started off with sort of a thing like on learning styles. You know, so we had a class of kinesthetic learners, a group of collaborative learners, and some independent accelerated learners. And, you know, I'm assuming we all know the data around that says that it's probably not the best thing for all kids, but it was what was needed at the time. But, like, I've got a list of about 20 things. But, yeah, there are a couple. Yeah?
I just wondered, do you put, like, limited expectations for what the students need to learn through the year? Or they just can choose?
Sorry, can we just pass the microphone? Yeah, sorry, go again, please.
I just wondered, do you put limited expectation for the students what they need to learn per year, or?
Not really, no, because we make it very clear to the students on enrolment that it's their learning, it's not mine, okay? It's their learning, and so, but most kids want to learn. It's a fairly natural thing. Like, to some kids we'll go, look, here's your program, you've done this and this for the last, you know, X number of years. As part of the ILP, the students have to say what they're doing for the next 5 years, okay? So that includes, Even if they're, in year 12 or their graduate year, as we call it, they've got to say what they're doing for the next 5 years. And so if what they want to get to in 5 years doesn't match their pathway, we can go, well, you're dreaming, all right? Because you're missing this link, this link, this link. And most kids will go, oh yeah, I better go and do, X, Y, and Z. We also do use the ACER PAT Maths and PAT English tests, just for the parents, and I think for us too as educators, we still want to know that we're seeing some growth. And they're a pretty good diagnostic tool. So we do measure the kids twice a year on those to see that they're still developing those core skills. But other than that, it's up to them what they want to do.
So what do you do if the students choose to just go to the sports course and just play sports?
I guess, well, we actually, like in all the kids that have been through, we haven't had that happen. We have had some kids who are doing 2/3 of their time basketball, okay? But those kids, we've also got 6 full scholarships to American unis for basketball. All right, and we actually employed Ian Stacker, who was the Australian Institute of Sport's men's coach. And so, if they're going to do it, there has to be a realistic, goal at the end of that. So we just support them in that.
Do you have teachers who just cater for everything?
We can't. No school can cater for everything, particularly small schools. So our job as educators is to connect them to experts. And if it's something that only one student wants to do, we'll connect them with a uni. And we've never actually been knocked back for making those sort of connections. I think we might have last question. Yeah.
When you say that that anyone can sort of do what they want to do, as far as
students,
students, sorry.
Yeah.
Just can you unpack that a bit further? Like what we're talking about there. Like, is there any limit to what they can do, and who's developing the curriculum? Are the kids developing the curriculum for that? Like what do they do, kind of like on a day-to-day basis? And
so, I could blow your mind, or I can tell you
Blow my mind.
Okay, blow your mind. We have a thing called the Hutagogy Centre, right? Now, I've got to say that the Hutagogy Centre is probably 5% of kids, all right? But Hutagogy, we know about pedagogy, yeah? Pedagogy, the definition of pedagogy is actually the teaching of young people, right? Children, right? And then we've got andragogy, which is the teaching of adults, learning where there's an end in mind, there's a problem to be solved, etc. And that's what they do at TAFEs and so on. And then there's a thing called heutagogy. It was developed about 20 years ago by the TAFE sector, and it's learning, Heutagogy. Okay, I had to rehearse that as a dyslexic. Heutagogy. And it's actually learning for nothing else than the love of it. Nothing else. Not to solve a problem, not to get a qualification, not to do anything, for a requirement, just because you love learning. Now, our school captain 2 years ago was and kids could be in the Hutagogy Centre for 1/3 of their time, 2/3 of their time, or full time. And so our school captain had no subjects. He left with no ATAR score. He left with a piece of paper that I signed, okay? At the same time, he designed a thermal suit that was like a singlet. He was a bit of a nerd. Singlet with wire woven through it and a heat exchanger in his backpack because he had thermal regulation issues, temperature. And so he could flip a switch and heat himself in winter and cool himself in summer. He built a motorised skateboard that would do like some ridiculous speed and, all the controls for that. He also was building his own Iron Man suit, which was an operable Iron Man suit that he was casting out of aluminium at school. All right, and he built the arm of it so that it would like open up and he could put his arm in, and he had little servo motors on it that would close it down. So, some of the staff said, Liam is leaving school with nothing. I've gone, what? Are you kidding? Liam's more employable than you are. Because you've got a portfolio. He doesn't need an ATAR. He's a lovely kid, but to be honest, if he did an ATAR, he'd be lucky to top out at 40. All right? Any kid at TC that's going to get less than 50, we go, don't encourage them. Okay? Don't play the game. Just do non-scored. All right? So I guess where it comes to, now remember that's 5%. The majority of kids select 6 subjects or 5 subjects, and they might have a personalised learning project where they want to build a drone or want to spend an extra, like they love art and they do an extra block of art or something. So the majority of kids, their program doesn't look hugely dissimilar, but if they really want to take it to the max, they can. My time is up, but thank you very much for your attention. Go out there, rock the world, change it for education. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Peter. As I said to Peter when I met him this morning, I was really excited to hear him speak in person. For me, that was a bit of a fanboy moment. I think I speak for everyone when I say you completely blow people's minds with your insights into how we could be doing things in different ways. And it's simply just coming from a simple question around why not. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please thank Peter Hutton once again?